Well, today, kids, we start Chapter 2, The River. When Mary arrived at the new inn, punctually at 10 o'clock, with their lunch tied up in white paper in the basket, she found John Crow seated on a bench outside the entrance with 2 oars and a long boat hook lying across his knees. The wind had sheered round to due south, and what there was of it was faint blowing. The sky was covered with an opalescent vapor. The sun was warm, and the wandering odors that were wafted toward the girl from the neighboring cottages had a sweetness in them beyond the pungency of burning peat, a sweetness that may have come from the new buds in the privet hedges, or from the dug-up earth clods in the little gardens at the back, where the spades and forks of the men still stood fixed to the ground, awaiting their return when the day's work was over. He rose with alacrity to welcome her, the 2 oars in one hand, the boat hook in the other. "I've got the key," he announced triumphantly. "It's at the end of Alderdyke on the big river. They say we better go there by Fulton Bridge." He lowered his voice and bent down his head. "Did any of them try to stop you coming? Did Philip say anything?" She shook her head and stood for a moment without moving, her face averted, looking dreamily down the street. "This will never happen to me again," she thought. "I am in love with him. He is in love with me. I shall never forget this day, and I shall never feel just like this ever again, whatever happens." She turned towards John. "I don't care where you take me," her look said, "or what you do with me, as long as we are together." But her lips said, "Do you mind going in and getting some more of that wine, John? I didn't want to make my basket too heavy, so I left it on the table, the bottle of milk that Aunt Elizabeth made me take." He propped up the oars and the boat hook against the house and went in. Mary moved away, crossed to the other side of the road, and bending over along a low brick wall, stared at a manure heap in which the 3 black hens were scratching. The manure heap, with the 3 black fowls, became at that second a sort of extension of her own personality. She felt at that moment, as she rested her basket on the top of the wall, and heedless of her sleeve stretched her arm along its surface and ran her bare fingers through the cool, stone-cropped stalks, as if her soul was scarcely attached to her body. Almost without allowing her happy trance to be broken, she took down her basket from the wall, recrossed the road, and met John at the instant he emerged. "Sorry to have kept you," he chuckled, "but I've made them give me a flask of brandy as well as a flask of port. That's the best of having a greatcoat on, even on a hot day. Its pockets are so useful." They walked rapidly now, side by side, past the churchyard and past the gardener's cottages, at the drive gate where Ben Pod had counted the cars. They came to a narrow footway that led them across the little river by a bridge that was scarcely more than a plank, and after that across the fields to the big river. Here at Fulton Bridge, which they did not cross, they debouched from the path. Debouched, never heard that word before. And turning to the left, followed the river back downstream. They had not spoken a word since leaving the inn. Mary grew conscious, just before they got to Fulton Bridge, that she had been repeating to herself as she walked along, "That's the best of a greatcoat on a hot day. Its pockets are so useful." What she had been thinking was, how bony and thin was John's hand as it clutched the boat hook, which swung horizontally between them like an antique spear. John was delving in his memory for something important. There had been several patches of yellow marigolds along the path that they had followed, and these had excited a tantalizing feeling in his mind that he could not fathom. Those gleaming yellow flowers kept leading his memory to the verge of something and then deserting him and turning into a blur of blackness. Tom Barter had to do with it, but it was not just Barter. It was not Barter. The preoccupation with an obscure past, although it made him grave and silent, did not lessen his delight in his companion's presence. They were indeed, both of them, thrillingly happy, these 2 flesh-covered skeletons, drifting so lingeringly across the banks of the Wessie. But John's happiness was much more complicated than Mary's. His return to his native land played a part in it. The revival of local memories played a still larger part. And this later feeling was so intimately associated with Tom Barter that to oust that sturdy figure from its place was impossible. He kept reverting to the marigolds, especially to their stalks in muddy water, and he kept thinking, too, of the stickiness of certain lumps of flour dough mixed with cotton wool and treacle that Tom and he had used for bait for roach and dace. Perch, that more rapacious fish, despised these harmless pellets, and he wondered whether it could be the black stripes of these deep-water fish and their enormous mouths, or the stickiness of this bait for the others, or a certain kind of homemade ginger beer that their grandfather's cook used to make, and not the marigolds at all, that had been the taproot of his rapturous sensation. It was not that this tantalizing sense of being on the edge of some incredible life secret interfered with his feelings for Mary. It was that his possession of Mary had become a calm-flowing tidal stream which released and expanded all the antennae of his nature. These responses left up towards the unknown, like those great slippery fish at Harrod's Mill. Tom Barter, marigold stalks, fish scales, dough pellets, all these and the secrets they held depended, like the long shining river weeds upon which his eyes now rested, upon the flow of that stream of contentment which was his possession of Mary. Coffee break. They were walking now very close to the river bank, and it was not long before they reached Dye's Hole. This spot was really a series of deep holes in the bed of the Wessie where the stream made a sweeping curve. Over these dark places in the swirling water bent the trunks of several massive willow trees, and between these trees and the edge of the stream there was a winding path, too narrow to be trodden by horses and cattle, but interspersed with muddy footholds and beaten-down clearings amid the last year's growths, where it was just possible for two people to stand close together, having the willow trunks behind them and the dark water in front. John stopped when he reached the largest of these little clearings, and standing on the trodden mud, balanced the two oars and the boat hook against the branches of an elder bush, which hung over a narrow ditch on the side of their path opposite to the river. Then he turned around and, facing Dye's Hole, waited for the girl to come up. The back of his head touched the vivid green shoots of a gigantic willow tree whose roots, like great thirsty serpents, plunged below the flowing water. As soon as the girl reached him, he took her basket from her and laid it down on the ground, taking care to place it where a fragment of an old post of dark, rotting wood pierced by 3 rusty nails would prevent it from toppling over into the ditch. As he placed it there, he chanced to touch, between it and the post, a newly growth shoot of water mint, and at once a wafture of incredible automatic sweetness reached his brain. They both stood still and gazed around them. "I wonder if you and I will ever see all this again," he said. "It's home to me," she said. "It's home to both of us," concluded John. And the two of them, as if they were one flesh, drank up in great satisfying draughts the whole essence of that characteristic spot, with the same unspoken understanding that they had brought their thoughts together before. The girl's hat and the man's cap were now thrown together on the earth at their feet, and they gave themselves up to a protracted love-making. Ooh. What was remarkable about this love-making was that during their embraces, in which the man held her and caressed her, first with her body, front against his, and then with her face turned towards the river, their male and female sensuality, he possessing and she being possessed, was, in the earth-deep differences, of exactly the same magnetic quality. Okay. This was not due to his experience or to her inexperience, for in these matters, nature, the great mother of all loves, equalized them completely. It was due to some abysmal similarity in their nerves which, after making them fall in love, made them make love in exactly the same manner. There always remained the unfathomable divergence in their bodies, in their minds, in their souls, due to their being male and female. But their similarity of feeling was the exciting element sounding the depths of ever new subtleties, and their deliciousness of like in unlike. What John and Mary really did was to make love like vicious children, and this was due to the fact that they were both very nervous and very excitable, but not in the faintest degree tempted by the usual gesture of excessive human passion. The rationalism of analytic logic had divided erotic emotion into fixed, conventional types, popular opinion offering one set of categories, fashionable psychology offering another. As a matter of fact, each new encounter of two amorists creates a unique universe. No existing generalization, whether of the wise or of the unwise, covers or ever will cover a tenth part of its thrilling phenomena. In one respect, this lovemaking by Dies Hole was the most childlike that the spot had ever witnessed. In another, it was the most cerebral. The nervous excitement manifested by these two was so free from traditional sentimentality and normal passion, so dominated by a certain cold-blooded and elemental lechery, that something in the fibrous interstices of the old tree against which they leaned was aroused by it and responded to it. Ooh. And so when they forsook that ledge of muddy ground between the Confederate tree and the dark water, it was not only with relaxed nerves and an absolute sense of mutual understanding, it was with a dim awareness of some strange virtue having passed into them. Lingering behind the girl was a moment the man pressed his forehead against the indented willow trunk and murmured a certain favorite formula of his relating to his dead mother. Oh, I'm sorry. He didn't have a comma there, but he should have. I'm going to read that again. Lingering behind the girl for a moment, the man pressed his forehead against this indented willow trunk and murmured a certain favorite formula of his relating to his dead mother. After that, taking up his oars and boat hook, he followed the girl along the river bank. It did not take them long now to reach Alder Dyke. Should I read a little bit more? I think I'll stop for now. So that was the beginning of River, Chapter 2, The River, and it's getting steamy again. I guess old John Cowper Powys is getting... Peas? Is getting a little randy again. So I wrote a little love scene in there. But I've been enjoying it so far. I'm curious. It seems like maybe... going by what happened with the ghost at the end of the last chapter, that perhaps John Crow is Philip, the capitalistic, I don't know, logical, I guess you would say, engineering mine owner, perhaps might be John's father. So that's interesting. Yeah, really interesting. So... that's it for today. I'll see you again in part, I think we're on to 12 now, but don't count me on that. Cheers!